1. When the walker asked me to talk about connectivity and community, I remember thinking I probably wasn't the best gal for the job. I expressed my concerns, that I hadn't given much thought to the subject, that my response to the phrase arts journalism and criticism in a digital age is typically a scrunched up face. I write a column for Artforum.com. I publish poetry chapbooks. It's all part of the same mess. But of course I said yes. A freelancer's gotta eat. Months later, when I asked if there was a particular mandate I should keep in mind, I was told, quote, "We're very much looking to avoid one-size-fits-all canned TED Talks," end quote. Later, when I told a fellow writer I was having difficulty approaching this topic, she emailed back, quote, "Connectivity and community are the lies of our age. How would anyone actually feel connected via the internet?" A week or so before today, I asked Twitter what it would do if it had to give a talk on community and connectivity. I received one response from the writer Mareed Case, whom I've never met. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name right. She wrote, "Handwriting is still important." 2. One of my early articles for The Times was a 2005 profile of the choreographer Arthur Aviles, who after an impressive international career as a dancer had been working to establish an inclusive performing arts center in Hunts Point, a South Bronx neighborhood that has not historically been all that interested in the arts or in embracing feminist and queer perspectives. Roughly 10 years into his project, the center was both humble and thriving, decidedly site-specific and grassroots. It wasn't, in other words, anything the New York art world would pay attention to, unless it happened to fit a flavor of the month whimsy. "No one will ever say he's made it if I'm in the Bronx, and I'm fine with that," Arthur told me. "I feel satisfied with the career I've had. This is the next step, to come back home and develop a dance community." Referring to the drive that many choreographers in the Bronx had to make it to Manhattan, he said, "They want something bigger, which I understand." And then he added, "I want something small, something respectful." 3. My first substantial journalism gig in New York was at the Associated Press. Back then, the AP was still headquartered in Rockefeller Center, its venerable history announced by the 10-ton Isamu Noguchi sculpture entitled News that adorned the front door. Entering the office, it was hard not to feel, if only fleetingly, that one was doing something important and useful in society. Unless, of course, your job was as an online editor. The multimedia desk where I worked wasn't even housed in the same building as the rest of the organization. I'm not sure if I was paying enough attention to grasp the brilliance of the department charged with connecting AP to the World Wide Web being marooned, or perhaps quarantined is the better word, in its own building. But I do remember one reporter saying to me, "Oh yeah, you work at that desk whose purpose nobody else here knows." There's nothing so symbolic as geography. AP Digital was like an island of misfit toys, populated by rookies, jobbers, and a few actual multimedia specialists whose reactions to AP's rather impressive ineptitude in the face of a technological sea change ran from disbelief to disdain. I worked part-time on that desk for several years in which attitudes about the online operation from other AP folks didn't so much shift as expand to include the irritated belief that digital initiatives were the only ones safe from chronic cutbacks. Meanwhile, I scanned the internet on my numerous desktop monitors, tried not to make any intensely bad mistakes in the headlines I spent most of my shifts composing, and wrote for the arts desk whenever I could. I realized I wasn't a journalist. I began to think of criticism as a Trojan horse. 4. I started the Performance Club in 2008 while working as a cultural critic for WNYC New York Public Radio. WNYC had gotten a big chunk of foundation change with the mandate to promote online community. With the initiative languishing and the foundation demanding results, WNYC ordered its contributors to drum up proposals for its website. Mine was the Performance Club, which I imagined as a sort of book club for live art, one that would unfold in the flesh and virtually, so that people could take part in the discussions through monthly social gatherings around performances, while also having conversations that would continue on my blog, forming an archive of discussions and debates. My proposal was responding to two things that had been frustrating me for a while. One was that I would take friends to the live art I was then writing about, and in spite of being smart and knowledgeable in other fields of contemporary culture, They would come out of these performances and just say, I don't know how to talk about this stuff. The critical minds they would use to read any other sort of text were not being activated. At the same time, conversations with my colleagues, the actual critics, often tended toward the petty. Little clusters of us marooned in lobbies throughout New York, spending our intermissions making these hierarchical assessments. So-and-so was better than so-and-so. This work used to look better than it does now. I was interested in the possibility of creating a third space. If we brought together people who were already intensely knowledgeable about live art and people who were curious but felt they had no way to talk about it, I wondered if we could collectively create a more fruitful conversation. To put it another way, I like talking with smart people. It's one of the only consistently good reasons I can think of for getting out of bed in the morning. 5. Trust your boredom. That's one of my favorite one-liners in Jonathan Burroughs' marvelous book of one-liners, A Choreographer's Handbook. I appreciate its get-out-of-jail-free insistence. And just now, it seems important. I had assigned sections of the text to my students earlier this month, and prepping for class, cramming on the train as usual, I was stopped by these 3 words. It's not that I'm bored exactly by the idea of connectivity and community, but it makes me restless. My answers to it feel small, preordained, as if we all assume we know what we're talking about, as if alienation isn't the right answer, as if technology actually lessens class divides. 6. The performance club I want to emphasize was something I proposed because I had to propose something in an area I had never considered as an actual thing, fostering online community. I couldn't show up to this meeting empty-handed, and so I concocted several half-baked ideas, thinking one of them might stick long enough to impress my producer. Such is the lot of the contemporary arts freelancer, busy racing along, as one colleague's husband put it, on the hamster wheel to nowhere. I wasn't expecting the thing to actually stick. Had I expected it to stick, I'd like to think I wouldn't have saddled myself with the P Club nickname, something that another colleague later helpfully pointed out, quote, sounds like a cabal of urination fetishists. But I digress. Having almost never been in a club, I found myself running a rather successful one. People showed up to performances and stayed out for hours after to talk about them. Despite WNYC's terrifically wonky web infrastructure, people also left smart and thoughtful comments on my attempting to be pithy blog posts. The club became known around New York and beyond, even spawning several like-minded ventures. I liked this network aspect of it, which didn't yet seem oppressive. Also the improvisational nature of it, the thinking and writing out loud. It was a good moment. 7. A journalist friend and I were wandering around the streets of San Francisco the other day in search of a good midday drinking bar. The subject of Twitter came up, and we agreed that there is often a direct correlation between feeling terrible and being on it. Another day, I was visiting an editor at the San Francisco Chronicle, which is about 15 minutes walk from what everybody in that city calls the Twitter building. A guy in maybe his mid-50s got in the elevator with me as I was leaving the 3rd floor, and when I asked him which button he wanted me to push, 1 or 2, he said, there is no more 2. Then he clarified that it no longer belonged to the Chronicle. I asked him what was there. The usual, he said, bunch of hunched-over 20-somethings plugged into their laptops. In other words, the same old story. 8. What's the best web infrastructure for fostering responsive arts journalism that encourages valuable, substantive conversations between writers and readers? That's one of the questions we're meant to answer. I'm not sure what the best infrastructure is. I do know I've never worked with it. Every system I've become part of has come with some sort of disclaimer that the technology is outmoded and or in some way not up to the task of being truly interactive. And the assumption is always that interactive means lots of traffic, lots of linking, liking, reposting, etc. In this, I see a strong parallel with the idea of the traditional audience member as passive, as if anything that happens below the surface cannot count as true engagement. Writers busying ourselves with numbers. We are wholly beholden to the quantifiable. There never appears to be an easy or good way to make these systems better. This seems like a very old human problem. The fashions change, but not the body. The status quo lets us distract ourselves with the pretty idea that we have found alternatives, and we comply, giving it all away. Two other questions posed for this panel. How does a platform create a sense of community around the ideas it presents? And how can the online intersect with the in-person? The Performance Club was always conceived of so that anybody could be a member. It was free and open, to the extent that those things actually exist. It was up to individuals to decide how they wanted to interact with the idea of the club. There were people who read everything that was online but never once came to an event, and there were people who would come to the events religiously. They ranged from practitioners, artists, funders, writers, and people who worked in art spaces, to WNYC listeners who had no particular connection to the arts. Most of these people were lovely. Some were much more at ease in person than online, and vice versa, with myriad ways of performing and presenting themselves. A few made demands that only in retrospect presented themselves as inappropriate and creepy. I found the live gatherings both exciting and exhausting. It became clear that in creating the Performance Club, I signed up to be a social sculptor, someone who had to shape and care for public space, whether one person showed up or 35. This very particular sort of caring felt the same whether the space was physical or digital. Does a platform create a sense of community any differently than any other system? Is it ever the platform really that makes the difference, outside of extreme examples of technological ineptitude or dazzlement? Running an online anything seems to be a lot about being a good host. The onus is on you to make your guests feel comfortable, to try and head trouble off at the pass, or to set up collision courses if that's the sort of party you're interested in. And for the guests, the question is, do you want to be in a room with anonymous bodies, the pleasures and perils in that? Or do you want to be at the dinner table, jockeying for the best seat? 9. In one episode of Girls, Lena Dunham's character meets with another publisher who is interested in her book, which is in limbo after the death of her first publisher. The only catch, this new publisher tells her, is that, quote, we don't do ebooks. We'd want to put it out as an actual book, you know, that you can hold. I hope that's okay with you. The camera cuts to Hannah. There's a pause, and then she breaks out into high, pealing laughter. Are you kidding me? I mean, that's the best thing I've ever heard. I just said yes to an ebook because it was better than, like, a no book. In another of the many exchanges I had with colleagues while procrastinating on these remarks, I told a friend who edits an online publication that I didn't know what to write, in part because my perspective is firmly writer-based, and, quote, P-Club aside, I don't think I do anything differently in print versus online, other than structural things like making use of hyperlinks, end quote. She messaged me back, quote, I find that you do write with a kind of online sensibility for print, your style and tone. I think that's one of the things I like about your writing. I was curious at how pleased I was by her response, as if it granted me some sort of currency or legitimacy, and at the same time I had no idea what she meant. My pleasure made me slightly queasy. 10. When I left WNYC in 2010, that was the end of the Performance Club, or that's what I figured until the following year, when I was approached by 2 former members who convinced me to relaunch, with their help, as an independent entity. This new iteration of the club received a Creative Capital Warhol grant in 2011. On the website, you can still find the following proclamation, quote, we intend to build the club into an independent, multifaceted, real-time, and web-based center for interactive discussion and forums involving audiences, artists, and other writers, as well as an informational hub on the NYC performance scene. I made good on this officious grant language for about a year and a half, hosting monthly events and online conversations. I paid contributors and curated conversations. I joined Twitter. 11. Earlier this year, I was guest curator for Danspace Project's Platform 2015, 6 weeks of performances, workshops, and readings entitled Dancers, Buildings, People in the Streets. The main performance spine featured arranged marriages of artists from disparate experimental traditions in New York. 2 of these artists, Caitlin Gilliland and Will Rawls, decided that instead of a studio practice, they would create a social media one, wading through the pop cryptic world of text acronyms and emoji to find a common language of artistic desire and mediated intimacy. What they finally presented consisted largely of a staged reading of this dialogue. The audience seemed split between those who found it intensely moving and those who wondered why they didn't dance. One critic wrote, quote, their bodies seemed as well matched as their minds, so why not dance together? If they took yet another step and explored partnering, it would have been worth 10,000 words. There's always so much anxiety around language. the violence it does to nonverbal forms, simultaneously how inadequate it is. 12. Some time ago, I got an email from the Warhol Foundation asking for numbers. They were doing an internal review and were looking at how past projects were faring. Their measuring stick was based on traffic, of course, metrics. I remember when I had the blog at WNYC. Some days I used to feverishly check my stats. A lot of fretting was involved. The Warhol request was not unreasonable, and it came from folks who have been unceasingly supportive and understanding, minor miracles in the foundation world. I can't remember if I answered that email. It appears I may have deleted it. There didn't seem to be any way to answer without sounding defensive or dismissive. For example, the sentence, "I don't measure success through site visitors," is obnoxious on so many levels, where even to begin. How do you explain that you junked the entire concept of the book club for live art in favor of building a space for criticism as art for weird little chunks of writing that most people will have zero interest in? Is there a way to say that the island of misfit toys suits you more than the mirage of inclusivity? That you're worn out by the evangelism game artists and writers are supposed to play? I have no appetite for convincing anybody of anything. Also for lasting. We don't last. Why should the things we make be any different? 13. I'm so uninterested in anxiety around criticism. It just seems like a given. 14. I ended the Arthur Aviles profile with his quote about wanting something small and respectful. An older critic in the paper emailed me to say, quote, "I loved the kicker particularly, and I hope you realize the fact that they put a refer on the front page of A&L means that the Top Guns liked it too," end quote. Those two impulses, the romanticizing of the humble effort and the desire to be widely seen, seem at the crux of many a present-day difficulty and weirdness. Just think of the slow blogging movement. It's so tempting to make a fetish out of the small and local. It's so tempting to measure your worth in social media likes. Both of these things are themselves so obvious and off-stated as to be embarrassing to even mention. 15. When I was running the previous version of the Performance Club, I began noticing that at our monthly outings, I no longer watched shows with the same eyes. I wasn't there in that alone-in-the-crowd capacity that the traditional critic of live art feeds on. I was watching with a communal eye, in connection to the now very specific bodies around me, bodies for whom I felt responsible. Is this so different from the imperceptible transformations that occur when your office is enveloped by the internet? There's something profound here, which I will but draw a circle around for you to ponder, Maggie Nelson writes in The Argonauts. All those bodies hunched over their machines. I'm back to my own stupid self, Jonathan Burrows writes in his handbook. The computer as compositional space and gathering place, studio and market, room of one's own and rooming house. The critic as cyborg, writing alone in a crowd. Thank you.